Welcome, folks. I'm Jaby KOAY, joined by ACHARA KIRK.
What's up?
We're back to talk about Avatar: The Way of Water. This is a non-spoiler review. We're going to go into a little bit more details than we did in our initial impressions, but we're still not going to give away any major spoilers. We are going to give you a little bit sense as to what's going on in this story, just to kind of help you know what you're getting into. If you don't want any spoilers whatsoever, like no details even, you've been avoiding all the commercials, then don't even watch this. If you're okay with a little bit just to, know what the movie's about, then, stick around and we'll give you our thoughts and feelings about it. Jake Sully, if you watch the first Avatar, him and his family are migrating to a new location for the safety of his family because there is a familiar threat. And in this new environment, they discover other Na'vi that they are completely unfamiliar with, even to Zoe Saldana's character Neytiri, and they have to learn the way of water. If any one of you guys have ever dealt with like moving house, or moving across country, or moving across the world, as it were, then you're probably familiar with some of the difficulties that these characters encounter, but it's emphasized and magnified with fantasy elements and action and beautiful, breathtaking, sweeping landscapes and visual effects and all that stuff.
Yeah, it was really, really enjoyable. Like we said in our first video, our first impressions, it is a very simple story. But by the very nature of it being a simple story, it's easy to get hooked into. And with the family comes a whole host of new characters with the children. Yeah. And then in addition to that, when they move to this new place with, having to live with the tribe that lives in the water and with the water, we're also introduced to more new characters and more kids and all of the shenanigans and the conflicts that ensue. The thing that I think they did a really fantastic job with was introducing these new characters and making us care about them.
Right.
Because I thought the children were great. All of the young actors and actresses that were involved in this, I thought did a fantastic job. And by the end of it, when the big climax happens, I was like, I care about each and every single one of these characters, which is a feat in itself because there were so many.
Here's the thing. There were some challenges for the film already when going into this for me because of the HFR, the high frame rate. I looked at some of the comments on our first impressions video and I was kind of surprised as to what people were saying. Like, they did their research and Dolby's the best 3D, or they like HFR. I was like, wow, okay, cool. Like, I'm glad that some of you guys are enjoying this because a lot of money was invested into this technology.
Right.
It doesn't work on me so much. I don't care about the 3D as much. I'm fine with it. I hate the HFR. I wish it would go away. So I definitely need to see this film again. What's interesting to me is how much I enjoyed it in spite of its runtime, in spite of the 3D not being my favorite kind, and in spite of the HFR. I'm like, despite all that stuff, and despite the fact that the premise of the film is a little bit goofy, but somehow this film won me over, and I think it's because of what you're saying, because of the action, because of how breathtaking it is, because, I connect with the characters and all that stuff. Like, this has so much going for it in terms of the character dynamics and what the characters are encountering. And there's a lot of relatable stuff, I think, especially for young people in the film, because, I'm someone who had to switch schools twice, essentially, and I know what it feels like to feel completely isolated or removed and having to find your way again and make new friends. And that's what this film explores, but with crazy action, with circumstances that are supremely wild and really, really fun and stuff that you don't actually get a lot of in other movies. Like, you'd think you would have gotten stuff like this in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, but this goes well beyond the scope of what Wakanda Forever explored in terms of underwater stuff.
Yeah, the underwater stuff was amazing. I loved the wildlife, basically the flora and fauna that you get to see under the water, right? There was a really cool creature, well, actually several cool creatures as well that had relationships with the Na'vi that I thought was really interesting. And I love how it kind of weaves spirituality and stuff into it as well, which, as you know, I'm really into.
There's some interesting stuff that happens in the film that was making the audience laugh at the screening we were at. And mind you, everyone attending this screening, it's like they're kind of professionals in some sense, whether it's YouTube or critics, the whole gamut of that. These are people who take movies quite seriously. And there were people laughing at the screening because of stuff happening in the movie when it was not intended to be laughed at. I think that it still wins people over, though, because the movie has so much heart.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's got a lot of heart. While there might be moments where you're like, that was weird.
Yeah.
Why did they react that way? But it was still just so it really got me.
Yeah.
It really got me.
I think that it needs to be treated like an animation for grown-ups. If you watch something like Aladdin, you don't take it too seriously that Aladdin is talking to the carpet. It's like, it's fun, whatever. But if you were to do that in a movie that is geared towards adults, you'd be like, why is he talking to the carpet? It's an inanimate object. You sort of have to apply that kind of logic and philosophy when watching this film. If you just roll with it, it's one of the best movies ever. Like, if you just roll with it. The budget of this film is astronomical. I don't know what it actually is, but it's somewhere in the ballpark of $400 million.
Wow.
And I'm like, I can see why. It's like, it looks so damn good. You can see when a production has spent money and they have taken their time.
They took their time.
And some people were rightly asking, like, is it just visual effects? Like, is it just a visual effects feast? Because that's boring. And it's like, well, clearly it's not just that. Because after 3 hours, you'd think like, oh, goddamn, like how much more of this movie is there? Like, I didn't have to go pee once. I was so engaged with the movie that at the end of the 3 hours, I was fine. Is it long? Yeah, it's long, but I feel like it was still well spent because you got to be part of these people's lives.
Yeah, James Cameron does a really good job with the characters in this movie. The standouts were actually the kids, because I guess there was a bit of a concern that this was just going to turn into like a movie all about the kids and it's a kids movie or whatever. But the children were really fascinating and they were fun to hang out with.
One thing that we haven't talked about is the villains in this movie, and I think that we largely have been avoiding that because we don't want to give anything away in the story or the plot, keeping things as ambiguous as possible. I think that they did a really, really good job with the villains in this movie. While I don't have as much of a recollection of specific characters in that team of people like I do with the Navi, like with the good people, the good guys, the protagonists, right? There was a lot of people on the protagonist side, right?
Yeah.
I remember most of them individually. On the villain side, on the antagonist side, I don't remember as many of them except for the main one. But even with that, I think that they did a really good job of giving us an opportunity to spend time with them and see things through their eyes and actually, in a weird way, kind of give us weird hope. Like, I don't want to get into it because then I'll give way too much away. I'll explain it off camera or in a spoiler discussion. But it gave me a hope of a different direction or how things could go in the story that I was like, oh, wow, like what if this? I think it really makes you think about the choices you can make in your own life, I suppose, and how you can approach things. There's a trope almost in every single James Cameron film that isn't explored deeper here, and I was actually surprised. It's explored a little bit, enough to like elicit laughter, intended laughter, and familiarity, things that you're like, I remember that feeling because like you're dealing with the kids and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't go as deep as I was expecting it to, which is very surprising. But I guess it's stuff that can be saved for further installments in Avatar.
And speaking about further installments, I feel like this was a very inviting movie to remind us why we want to hang out in Pandora again and why we might want to continue watching these movies, because there's been a long ass break between the first one and the second one. Yeah. And then I guess the question is like, why should anyone care? And after watching this movie, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready for more Avatar. I'm ready for more Pandora, because there were still questions. They did a really good job of planting little seeds of things that could possibly come. And so I have questions about certain characters and their significance and their importance. And so I'm like, oh, I see how this could come back in future installments, and that's exciting.
Yeah, but with that, they did a fantastic job of not making it feel like sequel bait.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
While it's clear that this story can continue, it felt whole on its own. It felt cohesive. It has the perfect balance, because I guess what I'm driving at is like oftentimes with like Netflix shows, you get to the end of it and you're like, now this is like sequel season bait or season sequel bait, all leading towards just this major cliffhanger. Then I got blue balls for a year or two until the next one drops. And it's so frustrating. And shows do this way too often. Like, I would get so enraged at Game of Thrones for the same thing. I'm like, every single episode was just a sequel bait to the next episode. I had this sneaking suspicion that it was just gonna be so dissatisfying at the end, which it was. That's what was great about this, was they went the opposite. Like, it wasn't the sequel bait. It was like, yes, there's a sequel in the works. You already know that. Yes, there are questions that are lingering that need to be answered in subsequent chapters, but this was still just a very whole movie by itself.
Yeah.
And which you'd hope after 3 hours. One of the things I kind of disagreed with you on in our previous video that I've had time to sit with and think about is the action element, because you were saying how the action is amazing, and I was like, well, there's no sequences in there where I would go back and watch that specific action. Having thought about it further, I think that as a whole, the action is quite exhilarating. It is quite exciting, and it's because it's motivated by what they're being driven by. You know?
Exactly. The reason why it was so cool to me was because I cared about all of those characters and the things that were happening to them. I was scared. I was nervous for them. It was exhilarating when they succeeded or when they failed. You know, I was on the edge of my seat the entire time and feeling really excited. So for me, that's what counts as like a fun action scene.
So you guys, I think that really covers the gamut of what we can talk about without spoiling the film. So thanks so much for hanging out. Let us know what you think of Avatar: The Way of Water after you get to watch it. Thanks again for hanging out. I'm Jaby KOAY. This is
ACHARA KIRK.
Peace out.